Gumwalk, who will be the techs helping us broadcast this committee meeting on SF.gov TV. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, please silence all electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today may appear on the March 17, 2015 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you very much. Could you please call item number 1?
Item number 1 is a resolution imposing interim controls for large-scale residential projects for an 18-month period.
All right. Supervisor Weiner is the author of this item, and he will make a few brief remarks on this on item number 1. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for agendizing this item today for consideration by the committee. Colleagues, these interim 18-month zoning controls before us today would help apply to the Corona Heights and Corbett Heights neighborhoods, would help to bring some order to a pretty chaotic trend in the neighborhood now in terms of smaller existing single-family homes that are being expanded or replaced by very, very large single-family homes, resulting in a series of discretionary reviews to the Planning Commission. This proposal would bring some order to the process by providing that under certain circumstances, these kinds of massive home expansions would require a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission. This proposal has been endorsed by several neighborhood associations, specifically Corbett Heights Neighbors, the Castro-Eureka Valley Neighborhood Association, and the Both Triangle Neighborhood Association. Earlier this year, several neighborhood associations came to me to ask for help to ensure that we have a strong, meaningful, and productive community process as part of the process of expanding regular-sized homes into massive single-family homes. There was a lot of concern about the way the process was playing out, and particularly the large number of discretionary reviews that were arising from what is really a rather small neighborhood. To be clear, this legislation is not about adding additional complication or delay to home renovations, to situations where families are wanting to add a bedroom or a modest expansion to their homes. In fact, projects are exempt from these controls if they are below 3,000 square feet, or even if they're above 3,000 square feet, but are increasing the square footage by less than either 75% or 100%. These controls, to be clear, only apply to situations where we are seeing a dramatic expansion of the size of the home, and only to projects that will then, as a result, exceed 3,000 square feet. Nor does this legislation ban anything. And in fact, there have been some, I think, misperceptions about this legislation. This is not a moratorium. This is not a ban. It bans nothing. It simply changes the existing process of discretionary review to a process where certain significant expansions of homes will require a conditional use. Conditional use is a well-established process in San Francisco that applies in many situations, in many neighborhoods, and is one to which our community and our planning department are very accustomed. It is a process that sets a clear timeline up front, and so you can avoid some of the unpredictability of the discretionary review process. The legislation will provide an incentive for all parties to work together to shape specific projects so that these projects are a productive addition to the neighborhood. And for those who state that this legislation is in any way anti-housing, and it is not, the conditional use process can actually result in increased density. In fact, in a recent project on 24th Street in Noe Valley, which requires a conditional use, the developer proposed 4 units, and there was significant feedback in the first conditional use process meeting, significant feedback from the community asking the developer to consider 8 units instead of 4 units. Specifically, this legislation would do the following. Any project that is proposing a final product of 3,000 square feet or less would be entitled exactly the same way it is today, no change. So just to be clear, this would ensure that people who are simply adding an additional bedroom or expanding their kitchen or adding an in-law unit would continue down the path that currently exists. For projects that propose a final product with square footage of greater than 3,000 square feet, the controls would apply for a single-family home if the square footage is being increased by more than 75%, or if an additional unit is being added by more than 100%. And in those situations, conditional use would be required. So there is significant latitude in terms of the size that it can be increased without triggering a conditional use. These controls only apply with truly dramatic expansions. On a vacant lot, the controls would require conditional use only when the final project would be greater than 3,000 square feet. In addition, for all project proposals, the legislation would generally require a rear yard open space of at least 45% of the lot area. That is the current requirement under the planning code. The existing requirement is of a 45% of the lot area in terms of rear yard. However, there are loopholes that have undermined that clearly stated requirement, and so this would tighten up that requirement given the importance of rear yards in many of our neighborhoods. There have been some concerns expressed, as I indicated, that this legislation is somehow anti-housing, and that is not the case. The legislation does nothing to reduce density in this neighborhood. This neighborhood is generally RH2 or RH3. The legislation does not reduce the number of units that can be placed on a lot. In fact, much of this neighborhood is encompassed by the Castro in-law legislation that I authored and that we passed last year that effectively increases the zoning in the area by allowing people to add an additional in-law unit within the existing envelope of the building. And just to give an example, under these interim zoning controls, if someone has a 2,000 square foot existing single-family home on an RH2 lot, that person could double the size of that home to 4,000 square feet and add not one but two additional units, given the Castro in-law legislation, without actually even requiring a CU, because the increase would not be more than 100%. And so this legislation will not in any way inhibit the ability of people to add additional units and to add much-needed housing. I also just want to say, for some people who have been critical of me for espousing this legislation, that my record in terms of supporting and pursuing increased housing supply in this era of our affordable housing or our housing affordability crisis, my record speaks for itself. I mentioned the in-law unit legislation in the Castro, and I currently have additional in-law unit legislation to allow buildings that are undergoing seismic retrofit to add in-law units. I've authored legislation to incentivize developers to add more affordable units into their buildings by loosening density controls. I authored the so-called micro-unit legislation, which will allow for a greater number of units in the same building envelope. I authored legislation to make it easier for universities to build student housing, and I have been strongly supportive of increased housing in District 8, whether along Upper Market Street or on Valencia Street or elsewhere. One can be very much in support of increasing the housing stock while still understanding that the fabric of neighborhoods matters, and that when you start seeing a trend where modest size and regular sized homes are being not doubled but tripled or quadrupled in their size from one size single family home to another size single family home, that is not adding housing, that is not addressing our housing crisis. That is simply creating a massive single-family home. And so, colleagues, I ask for your support on these interim controls. And at this point, if there are no comments or questions, I would propose that we open up for public comment. I do want to say that we have some minor amendments that I have distributed to you. The city attorney has informed me that these are not substantive, so we will be able to adopt them today and if you choose, forward the item out of committee.
Thank you very much. All right. To the public, we're going to go. Sir, we haven't opened public comment yet. Public comment is going to be 2 minutes. You'll hear a soft bell, and that will indicate that you have 30 seconds more. So I have a list of cards here that I'm going to read off. I'd like the folks to line up over here to my left, your right hand side of the chamber. First up is going to be Kevin, followed by Rick Walsh, Jenna Boulay, Marcus. I'm sorry, I can't really read this one, and Pat Dowd. Kevin, you're up. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Kevin Rear, and I live at 227 State Street. Supervisor Wehner, the Corona Heights neighbors want to thank you for recognizing the magnitude of this problem, for acting swiftly to bring this before you today. While this legislation is not perfect, but is probably the best that can be expected given the time constraints imposed from the onslaught of development in our neighborhood. You may be familiar with the 4-home towering development adjacent to the Lorando Museum. A photo was featured on the front pages of the San Francisco Chronicle in January. After a complaint from the director of the museum, DPW leveled a fine for illegal removal of 8 trees. At 22 and 24 Ord Court, the same project agent has a 3-home project and is requesting a variance to construct 2 new homes in the normally zoning-protected rear yards. The project agent reported no significant trees in the document provided to the planning department. Neighbors alerted the city to the fact that there were 2 35 and 45-foot Monterey cypress significant trees that are 2 to 3 feet in diameter, decades old, that overhang half of State Street. Nothing is deterring the developers from tearing down trees and building in required rear yards. The planning department recommends approval for project after project, no matter how out of scale and out of character they are, and no matter how many trees are removed legally or illegally. At an earlier meeting, one planning commissioner lamented that the Randall Museum home project never came before the commission. Does anyone realize that collectively it has cost neighbors in excess of $10,000 in city fees, an arborist, an architect, and others to help us gain a crash course in city codes and processes? Neighbors have volunteered hundreds of hours towards this effort. What we have learned that frightens us most is that the precedent-setting ramifications approval of these projects will have on future street and neighborhood development. This legislation will take the most egregious of the proposals and require conditional use. It does not stop a project, rather requires a question be asked. Is the development necessary or desirable? Maybe it will cause planners to take time to see and hear the merits of State Street.
Great, thank you. Next speaker, Rick.
Hi, I'm Rick Walsh, and my partner and I have lived on Ord Street for about 20 years now. And during that time, we've watched the renovation of our neighborhood, and it's been good. You know, the neighborhood wasn't in such great condition 20 years ago. And most of these renovations they were performed by the people in this room. And we're just trying to fix our homes up. It was cool. Then no one ever added 3,000 square feet until about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, something changed. And that something changed is suddenly the middle-class people who were trying to buy fixer-uppers and getting a foothold in the city were being outbid. And developers were spending huge sums of money for really, really small homes. One just happened 2 weeks ago. 1,500 square foot home, 32 Ord Street. Bad condition. $2 million for a teardown. Okay?
Can you speak into the microphone, local?
In the old days, that would have been bought by a middle-class person, and they would have fixed it up, and families would have moved in and become part of the neighborhood. And so why are the developers doing this, spending that much money? Is they make a lot of money when they add all that square footage and they get $1,000 a square foot, and then the middle class can no longer outbid these people. So from my bedroom window today, I see 12 small cottages undergoing this transformation by developers, not by residents. And what I ask is the legislation that Supervisor Wiener has proposed, it'll help slow this down. It can't stop it, I get that. But we just ask for it to be slowed down and to add some sanity to it. And thank you guys for considering it. We in the neighborhood, as you can see, most of us here, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just as a reminder to make sure you speak into the mic. Jenna is next, followed by our Marcus, Pat Dowd, Grace Gillerman, Robert Quinn. Jenna.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jenna Boulay. I live at 236 State Street. I would like to thank Supervisor Wiener for developing this legislation. I know there are protests coming from the development community, the only community that benefits from the rampant and insensitive development overtaking our neighborhoods. I would like to clarify for families who mistakenly might believe that this legislation prevents modest additions. It does not. In fact, even quite large additions can move forward with this legislation. It is only huge additions that will not be stopped, but will be looked at more carefully. This is not micromanagement. It is a last-ditch effort to protect the unique and family-oriented character of our low-density neighborhoods. San Francisco suffers from an income disparity between rich and poor that grew
I'm sorry, do you have something on the overhead
Yes.
that you're trying to show? SF.gov TV, please show the overhead. Thank you. Please continue.
Yes. San Francisco suffers from an income disparity between rich and poor that grew more between 2007 and 2012 than in any other city in the country. This is a graphic from a Chronicle article documenting this occurrence. There are all types of single-family homes in San Francisco, from 900 square feet to 10,000 square feet. It is the smaller home type that allows young families to get their foot in the door in one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. If we allow all of our 900 to 1,500 square foot homes to be redeveloped into 4-story blocks with tiny yards, there will be no starter homes left, no room for working middle-income families, no kids in our public schools, and no economic diversity left in a city increasingly characterized by the very rich and the very poor. Today's legislation isn't going to stop the trend, but it will slow it down enough in one neighborhood so that we can thoughtfully re-examine our values and our rules. I ask the legislation be sent to the full board for adoption, and I thank you for your time on this very important topic.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Ari Marcus, and my partner James May and I have owned and lived at 88 Museum Way since 1985. This property is one of the through lots developed only at one end that run between Museum and States that help define the special character of Corona Heights. Now, neither of us, neither I nor my partner, likes NIMBYism. We would like to see housing density increased where possible and appropriate, and we strongly support owners' rights to develop their properties to the full extent consistent with zoning controls and the city's design guidelines. We also agree that variances and exceptions should be granted when there are compelling reasons to do so. But we've become increasingly alarmed at the proliferation of very large, out-of-scale, out-of-character developments in Corona Heights whose cost makes them largely out of reach, in fact, completely out of reach for most San Franciscans. These projects have been made possible first by granting variances where none were reasonably necessary, and second, by allowing developers to skirt and even ignore residential design guidelines provided for by Section 311C1 of the Planning Code, which, and I'm quoting, are intended to promote design that will protect neighborhood character, enhancing the attractiveness and quality of life in the city. We believe that if enacted, the interim controls proposed by Supervisor Wiener will be a powerful tool to help the zoning administrator, the planning department, and the planning commission more forcefully ensure that the rules the city has wisely adopted to preserve its uniqueness will be enforced. We thank Supervisor Wiener, and we urge you and the Board of Supervisors to support this resolution.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Dowd, and I live on Ord Street, and I've lived there for 19 years. I want to thank Supervisor Wiener for sponsoring this legislation, and I urge you to support it, and the rest of the Board of Supervisors hopefully will also get the chance to support this legislation. One of the items that I think is very important is the fact that there is a 45% open space requirement on development on lots, and I have found that this requirement is being shoved aside over and over again by the planning department and by the planning commissioners who are granting variances and filling in entire lots with building with no green space whatsoever left in the lot. And I think the planning commission should follow their own rules and not allow this to continue. And I think this proposed legislation will hopefully remind them of that requirement. I'd also like to take note of the large turnout of our neighbors here and remind everyone that it's 1:30 in the afternoon and most of our neighborhood is at work. So I think it's impressive the number of people that have shown up to support this legislation and who in their hearts would like to see our lovely neighborhood stay as a lovely neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker will be Grace. Grace, followed by Robert, followed by Judith, followed by Ed Scruggs, followed by Henry Essler. Grace?
Hi, my name is Grace Gellerman, and I've lived at Vulcan Stairway for almost 4 years. From our front deck, we look out onto 6 separate properties in the immediately surrounding blocks, all owned by developers.
Grace, can you speak into the mic?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Is that better?
Better.
Okay. My name is Grace Gellerman. I've lived on Vulcan Stairway for almost 4 years. From our front deck, we look out onto 6 separate properties in the immediately surrounding blocks, all owned by developers, all in various stages of development, and all with proposed increases to their respective existing envelopes. The surrounding properties in this particular panorama are mostly small, older houses that evoke the history and scale of the neighborhood. The slopes of the considerable local hills have informed the layout of the streets, which are often narrow and appear to predate automobile traffic. The streetscape of this enclave of San Francisco is particularly unique and an important element of the neighborhood's character. State Street is the longest uninterrupted street in San Francisco. DeForest Way is the narrowest. The grid pattern of streets across most of the rest of the city is replaced here with a less conventional layout, curving narrow streets that dead end into other narrow streets, pedestrian-only streets, small stairway egresses. I think that the current trend to replace these houses with larger buildings with reduced mid-block open space would adversely alter the scale and charm of our neighborhood. So I want to thank you for introducing this legislation.
Thank you very much, Grace. Next speaker will be Robert Quinn.
Hello, thank you for your time. I've been an Ord Street resident. We bought the place in 1978, been there ever since. It's a Victorian that was built in 1908. When I moved there, it was the tallest building on the street. By no means is it even close. It's dwarfed now. As to echo the comments of one of my neighbors earlier, for a number of years, there were homes that were in certain states of disrepair, and people were coming in and doing very nice jobs, fixing them up, and the neighborhood felt, on the upswing. But in the last 2 to 3 years, this whole subject that we're talking about just came out of left field, basically. I mean, all of a sudden, the homes were doubling, tripling, quadrupling in size. And, having lived there for so long, I like a lot of the changes that have happened. But some of these new homes just feel so out of character for this small cul-de-sac street. And I would just like to see that if people are going to be building things that are so sizable, that it really gets looked at hard by both the city planning commission and also includes the neighbors, because that's one thing that I have heard time and again is that somehow some of these things seem to have just gotten kind of snuck past everybody, and the first time you really find out just how big the project is when it's finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up would be Judith, followed by Ed, followed by Henry. If you could get in line and queue up so we can move quickly, it would be helpful.
Good
Judith, you
afternoon.
can move the microphone to your mouth. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, okay.
There
Good.
it is.
Thank you.
All right.
My name's Judith Hoyam. Good afternoon, supervisors. I've lived at 4042 17th Street at the foot of Corona Heights in Eureka Valley for 44 years. You have a letter from Eureka Valley Neighborhood Association supporting Supervisor Wiener's efforts to better balance the need for housing growth in the city with the needs of settled residential neighborhoods in Eureka Valley and existing neighborhood character. Speaking as a member of the AVNA's Planning and Land Use Committee, I want to personally thank Supervisor Wiener and his legislative aide, Andres Power, for responding quickly and strongly to the neighbors' request for help. Our committee feels that the resulting interim legislation is reasonable and thoughtful, and we support it. The affected neighbors and we who are active in neighborhood land use matters do not want to stifle needed growth in housing in the city and in our neighborhood. But we want this growth to be respectful of the diversity of housing that currently exists in Eureka Valley and respectful of the unique character of each of its neighborhoods. We want to see strong efforts to preserve affordable housing and the creation of more of it. We do not want the neighborhoods turned into enclaves for the wealthy. We do not want Corona Heights, currently very diverse, to become an Atherton on the hillside. We believe that this interim legislation will provide the city and the planning department with an opportunity to produce permanent legislation to address the needs of all concerned in this rapidly changing housing environment in Corona Heights, Corbett Heights, and Mount Olympus in the Eureka Valley area. We urge you to join Supervisor Wiener in voting yes on this legislation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next. All right, ladies and gentlemen, just as a reminder, we have a board rule of no applause. I know it kind of takes the fun out of a committee meeting. But we have a nice, fun alternative. If you were to do spirit fingers to show something that you approve of, that helps the meeting move along. We've got a lot of people here, and I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. So are we in agreement? No more applause, but we will do. All right, there we go. Very good. Okay, next speaker is going to be Ed Scruggs, followed by Henry, followed by Dirk. Then there's Sonia and Fabiola.
Good afternoon. I'm a member of Eureka 17th Street Neighbors, a long-term resident of the Castro since 1968, and a homeowner in the Castro since 1979. I strongly urge you to support Supervisor Wiener's proposed legislation to curtail further proliferation of oversized housing, which too often is not only poorly designed, ugly, and unaffordable for the majority of the people in this room with me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scruggs. Next speaker, Henry.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I prepared a 3-minute and a 1-minute.
I suggest you get it down to 2.
The 3-minute is so much better, but I can't edit it effectively. So, first, I would like to thank and commend Supervisor Wiener for introducing this legislation. I don't personally live in the area covered by it, but I believe that it is a step in the right direction. What our city needs is greater density, not simply larger buildings. The developments this legislation targets serve only the needs of an exclusive few. If we let market forces run rampant, they will pave and overshadow every parcel they can buy. And unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be anyone in the planning department who has his hands on the reins. If we want to protect the beauty and character of our city, we have to exercise governance. Please adopt these controls, and please also consider similar controls in other RH2 and RH1 neighborhoods around the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good, Henry. Dirk.
Good afternoon. My name is Dirk Aguilar. I live on 30 Ord Street, which is in the area that would benefit from Supervisor Wiener's proposed legislation. Please allow me to begin by stating my support for remodels that embrace the character of Corona Heights and that are managed in concert with our community. My support does not extend to massive development that shows no accountability for the long-term implications on our neighborhood, especially if it does not help solve our city's housing challenges anyway. To our immediate left and right are two large developments, 2426 and 32 Ord Street. The latter aims at turning a charming 1,700 square foot hillside house into a 5,000 gross square foot single-family home. Protecting our house, our neighborhood, and helping other neighbors has become a part-time job that is costing us tens of thousands of dollars. Inaction is not an option, and in fact, it would have been downright dangerous for the structural integrity of our house. The situation has become alarming, and we need your help right now. I would like to thank Supervisor Wiener for proposing emergency legislation which ensures that oversized developments are carefully reviewed with neighborhood input. These controls only target developments that are larger than a very generous threshold considering the context of our neighborhood. Homeowners can still expand their houses to accommodate growing families. This reasonable and thoughtfully crafted legislation meets our urgent need, and this is exactly what we want. I respectfully ask the committee to please support this legislation and urge the Board of Supervisors to pass it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Sonia Fabiola, followed by Robert, Susie, Culliver, Steve, and Robert Mould.
Good afternoon. My name is Sonia Renner, and I live at 30 Ord Street here in beautiful San Francisco. Allow me to start by saying that I'm not entirely against development in our neighborhood. However, it is quite irritating and frustrating to see developers change the face of Corona Heights without considering the interests of the community. People who move to Corona Heights have chosen this neighborhood due to some compelling characteristics. We do not only value the diversity of people living here, we also love the lush gardens that are home to a broad variety of plants, flowers, trees, and animals. Building massive single-family homes in Corona Heights, Corbett Heights, must stop for several reasons. Allowing developers to make substantial profits at the expense of a long-established community would be a huge mistake. We cannot risk that residential neighborhoods become a concrete jungle. We must not allow people who do not intend to live in our neighborhood get away with destroying the charm of our streets. Reasonably sized and priced houses are what the neighborhood deserves and wants. Building gigantic single-family homes is not sustainable, regardless of whether the constructions meet current environmental codes. Let's live up to our reputation and be a role model in terms of environmental stewardship. We owe it to the next generations. It's not a win-win situation. The house next to us, 32 Ord Street, 1,700 square foot single-family house, has recently been sold with architectural drawings for a 4,900 square foot single-family home. If this house was developed as planned, it would have a substantial impact on our investment while not even adding new housing units. I kindly ask you to please support Supervisor Wiener's proposed legislation by voting for interim zoning controls in Corona Heights and Corbett Heights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up will be Fabiola, then Robert Herman.
Hi, my name is Fabiola Covarrubias. I live in the affected area on Ord Street. I'm fully supportive of Scott Wiener's proposed legislation. You have heard time and time again today that massive developments have become increasingly pervasive in our charming neighborhood. We feel that Scott Wiener's legislation will provide controls that actually ensure a thoughtful, reasoned approach to review of these proposals without stopping development altogether. They'll allow also for strong neighborhood input, and we are the ones living with the changes. And homeowners will still be able to improve their homes and for their expanding families and their needs. So we urge you to please support the legislation and to vote yes.
Thank you. Robert Herman.
Mike?
That works as well. Sure. Or either microphone works. They're both live.
Hello. Good.
Hi.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Herman, architect who lives at number 5 Vulcan Stairway in the midst of the zone. I'd like to thank Supervisor Wiener very much for introducing these interim controls. I'd like to speak only to the 3,000 square foot upper limit. Our architectural practice has designed thousands of urban apartments, many of which are three-bedroom units of only 1,200 to 1,300 square feet. So 3,000 square feet is more than ample and would be appropriate for maintaining the existing delicate neighborhood contextual scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Susie Colliver.
Hello, supervisors. Thank you so much for hearing us out today, and thank you, Scott Wiener. I also live at 5 Vulcan on the Vulcan Stairway just above Ord. I've lived there now for 15 years and moved there because of the character of the neighborhood. I grew up in Presidio Heights in a very large house, 4,000 square feet, most of which was never used. And I know what it takes to raise a family in the city. Our neighbors at number 3 Vulcan have lived there for 50 years, and they raised 4 children in a home very much the same square footage of ours, which is 750 square feet. So the argument saying that this ordinance would limit the ability of families to live in the neighborhood doesn't ring true. It seems that the controls that are suggested still leave plenty of latitude for existing families and new families to add on as they need to, while maintaining the cozy and intimate scale of the neighborhood. So thank you for considering this ordinance.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Steve Clark Hall, Robert Mould, followed by Nancy Peoples, Philip Crawford, and Joyce Roschinger.
I'm Steve Clark Hall. I've been a long-term resident of Eureka Valley for more than half of my life, and at one time called home inside the proposed area. I'm going to be the biggest downer in this meeting, and that being said, I will also say I do support Scott in his efforts to keep 6,000 square foot single-family residences in this neighborhood where they do not belong. And I do hope that you do support him in this. I recognize it's interim legislation until we can get the planning department and rules to the planning department so they can follow them, and so we can actually achieve what all these people want to achieve. My 2 big issues were that the 3,000 square foot limit is an issue for the uniqueness of building on high slopes, and I also feel there may be some unintended consequences, but because this is interim, it's only an 18-month period. Even old people like me can probably wait 18 months to be able to get our projects going. So I do support Scott, what he's trying to do for our neighborhood, and I hope that you will follow through with his proposed legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Robert?
Yeah, hi, my name is Bob Mould. I moved into Ord Street, purchased a house a little less than 5 years ago. Thank you, Supervisor Wiener, for hopefully bringing some sense to what's happening. It just seems like there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of development, now we have overdevelopment. And it just feels like nobody in the planning commission is, I know they're overworked, right? There's a lot of projects all over the city. There's a lot of things that people say are very important. We need to grow. It'd just be nice if the neighborhood could have a little bit of a say as to the scale of buildings that are going up next to smaller homes. It would be nice if the commission would actually take a little more time and care and, show a little bit of the concern that we do as a neighborhood for, the growth and development and the future of the city. Development is good, overdevelopment is not so good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Nancy.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Peoples. I'm a native San Franciscan. I live on Mars Street. I'm just here to support this legislation. Most of the reasons have already been stated by the people who have spoken, and I just hope the Planning Commission can step back and take a look at what is happening with some of these huge homes that are out of scale. Thank you.
Thank you. Philip Crawford.
Thank you. My name is Philip Crawford, and I'm a homeowner
on Clifford Terrace. I've owned my home there for just over 30 years now. And I speak today in support of Supervisor Wiener's moratorium to control what I consider out-of-control development of massive homes in the city. This trend that we're seeing all around us risks changing the very nature and character and, of course, the diversity of our neighborhoods. And it further and most importantly, it makes these changes permanently. They're irreversible once these developments are put in place. I live around the corner from a proposed development where 2 existing homes totaling less than 3,000 square feet are being proposed for replacement by 5 individual single-family homes totaling over 31,000 feet. So a massive change to the very character of the neighborhood there. My hope is that this, what I think is a sensible legislation, will pass, and it will give the city some breathing room to reevaluate our development policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Joyce, followed by, it looks like, is it Chris Ponce?
Good afternoon. My husband and I live on Saturn Street, and one of the many reasons that San Francisco is a beautiful place to live is because of its charming and unique housing architecture, both single-family dwellings as well as apartments. Unlimited growth will transform this city into buildings simply made of steel and glass. All growth needs limits. There is so much space and infrastructure that needs to accommodate growth. I ask that you take the long view in considering options regarding zoning controls on overdevelopment. And by that I mean thinking beyond your terms in office by doing what is best for the good citizens of San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Chris, followed by Tricia Garlock, followed by Carol Glanville, followed by Ozzie Rome. SF TV, could you zoom out a little bit for the overhead?
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Parks. I live at 231 State Street. I am the DR filer against the projects at 22 and 24 Ord Court. One of the projects that was a catalyst for this legislation. Supervisor Wiener, thank you for proposing this legislation in response to the proliferation of new homes and home additions that are both out of scale and out of character in the neighborhood. I believe that there will still be some projects that will get through this and should go back to the drawing board, but it will catch some of the largest and most out-of-scale homes until permanent legislation can be developed. For families worried that they will not be able to expand in order to accommodate a new bedroom for children or family gathering, this is nothing to fear because of the fact that most additions will not be touched by this legislation. On the graphic, you can see these are the backyards that are circled in green, the rear protected backyards that normally development would not be allowed to because of the zoning. We do not have a traditional mid-block open space. Instead, we have alternating backyards that we share with adjacent Ord Court and Museum Way. The street-facing rear yards are homes to large and mature trees that have become home to the wild parrots of Corona Heights and many other birds and wildlife species. This shows you State Street. This aspect of our neighborhood, which is a defining feature, provides a unique transition between the densely developed standard lots close to Market Street and the entirely open space on Corona Heights. You can see the trees that would be removed that are in the protected yards that are on Ord Court that are on State Street, these large significant trees. Our neighborhood is under siege from developers on State Street alone, which is characterized by a bucolic nature. In addition to 2224 Ord Court, the list of larger projects proposed by LLCs include 53 states. 176, 178 State Street, 191, 92 Museum Way, and 214 State Street. 214 State Street has a stop work notice since last Christmas due to building permit infractions. 214 State Street is also being fined by DPW for illegal tree removal, as was 176 State Street. These are not residents expanding for their families. These are developers who care only about one thing, building the largest building that they can get away with to make the most money they possibly can. They don't care about our neighborhood character. They don't care about our birds and about our trees or about the people who actually live on these streets. This legislation is necessary right now. We cannot wait a moment longer, because if we do, within months, through lots will be gone, the trees will be gone, the birds will be gone, and I expect the working class families will be gone. Please recommend this legislation to the full board for immediate approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Tricia.
Hi. My name is Tricia Garlock, and my partner, Joelle Hallowell, and I bought Old Joe's house at 212 State Street almost 30 years ago. Although we know that progress will continue to alter the nature of any neighborhood, the recent pace of development in Corona Heights has been alarming. We support the proposed legislation in hopes to allow our community an opportunity to reassess how housing is planned and approved in our neighborhood. We are especially encouraged by the proposal to limit additions to 55% of lot coverage. Once monster buildings encroach on these spacious through lots, we can never turn back. When massive trees and sprawling yards are replaced by looming structures, birds and habitat disappear. The flora of adjoining properties are shadowed, and public street views are gone forever. At the moment, we live next to a construction site that is now under a stop work order by the Department of Building Inspection and also by OSHA. We believe that the planning department was not being overburdened by the recent breakneck speed of neighborhood expansion. The current developers would not have attempted to subvert the planning application process, dodge the DBI, and overshoot existing neighborhood limitations. We urge the board to approve this legislation and allow time to rethink the consequence of building oversized condos and oversized houses that serve only the wealthy and which will forever eliminate the wooded green open spaces and expansive public views that make up our extremely unique neighborhood. Please support this legislation. Thanks.
Thank you. Carol Glanville. Augie Rome is next.
Thank you. I'm Carol Glanville from Upper Terrace, and I'm here with a group of neighbors. And I want to point out that many of these neighbors are renters and not owners, but they're renters who've been there for a long time and love the neighborhood more than I can tell you, and have been more active than many of the property owners. Philip Crawford spoke eloquently about the project that's impending with the 6,000 square foot houses. And I want to point out that if the plans go through, the corner of 17th and Roosevelt would be totally changed in character. As you come up 17th Street now, you see trees and rocky outcrop. If the project were to go forward, you would no longer see any of that because the rock would be removed, as would the trees. Thank you, everyone, for all of your concern.
Thank you very much. Next speaker will be Ozzy, followed by Marianne Dressner, Rose Hilson.
Good afternoon. My name is Ozzy Rome. I live on Clipper Street. I'm here to commend Supervisor Wiener for introducing this legislation and being responsive to your constituents. We thank you. And I also want to extend my thanks to the neighbors and residents from Corbett Heights and Corona Heights who banded together and put their efforts forward and brought this to the attention of Supervisor Wiener and made some waves and got some results. In addition, I would like to add that this problem is not unique to Corona Heights and Corbett Heights. Us here at Noe Valley are experiencing the same problem, if not worse. Every other block is sprinkled with the proliferation of these houses that are mega, monster, plus 5,000 square feet. They do not add value for the problem of providing affordable housing, which I'm totally sympathetic to. Instead, they are actually changing the landscape of our city. I would like to urge you to extend this to the rest of the city, in particular Noe Valley, which is also in District 8. We need the same kind of protection. We actually deserve the same kind of protection. Our neighborhood has the unique character and charm that needs to be preserved. It's about the preservation, it's about ecology, and it's about affordability. The people who could afford 5,000 plus square feet at $1,200 per square foot are people who could buy it anywhere in the country. But we want to keep the same charm and character of Noe Valley. So please bring this legislation to pass.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mary Ann, followed by Rose Hilson, followed by Michael Morris, Sonia Traus.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Ann Dresner, and I live on Ord Court, and I have lived there for more than 30 years. This legislation is the first start to a problem that is plaguing many neighborhoods in the city. The qualities that we appreciate, scale, historic character, integration of trees and landscaping with a mix of housing types, are being threatened by developers who are singling out the smallest and often the quaintest and most affordable homes for redevelopment into monster homes of more than 4,000 square feet. Trees are being ripped down and neighborhood character is being paved over. If the smallest homes are being removed from the housing stock and only 4,500 square foot homes are being built in our few remaining vacant lots, where are families just starting out supposed to live? Conventional wisdom says that only people who earn close to $1 million per year can afford a $4 million house. If you're going to allow these monster homes into our neighborhoods, you are excluding everyone except those people that earn close to $1 million per year. The residential development market right now is serving only the very top of the economic spectrum. The city is a magnet for the rich, and nobody is stopping them. The city is spending all of its planning efforts on producing new neighborhoods east of Market Street and on no time on preserving the culture, scale, diversity, and architecture of our long-established West Side neighborhoods. What's wrong with this picture? We hope that this interim legislation is the first step in the development of a number of area plans, not just in Corona Heights, but in every neighborhood that is suffering from the onset.
Thank you. Next speaker is Rose Hilson, followed by Michael Morris, followed by Sonia Traus.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Rose Hilson. I'm on the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods Land Use and Transportation Committee. Although we haven't signed a resolution yet because this was kind of a last-minute announcement to our group, what I'd like to say is I thank Supervisor Wiener for allowing his constituents to bring forward this piece of legislation because Planning Commission has many ordinances, and it's not just that RH2s are supposed to have 45% rear yard. To planning's credit, and I'm not saying this because of going against anything here, believe me, it's about facts, and 45% rear yard is RH2. However, there is in Planning Code Section 134 on rear yards, also Section 136, which talks about exceptions to the rules. And in those exceptions is what creates all these various pop-outs that negate the open space in rear yards. So you have to dig down into the legislation because I'm always into the weeds. I think that neighborhoods are going to have to approach this very carefully because of various loopholes, as Supervisor Wiener mentioned. There are loopholes, and that includes building inspection department and what they are allowed to do. So just as a warning, this is great that you have this heard before this committee today because many other residential neighborhoods are going to be affected with neighborhood character, and this needs to be taken on a more serious level in various other neighborhoods throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Michael Morris.
My name is Michael Morris, and I've been a resident on State Street since 1978. State Street is a narrow, winding street, the longest block, I'm told, in San Francisco, and there's usually parking on both sides of the street. In the recent year or year and a half, I've noticed a big increase in the traffic on the street and a lowering of the quality of the driving on the street. I now see that just up the street, where there is a sharp bend, there is a multi-unit apartment block going up with garages opening right onto the street where there is a bend. Therefore, I'm glad to see that some legislation is going to be introduced which will control and look at all aspects of the development and try to control the character and preserve the character of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker, please. Michael Morris, are you up? Not here? Okay. Sonia Strauss? I have a long stack of speaking cards, sir. You can speak when to the item afterwards. Sonia Strauss?
Hi. There's some question about whether this legislation will stop housing or not. We've already heard neighbors mention specific projects. If neighbors felt that they already had the level of control that they want over their neighborhood, we would not be here. We also hear a lot of anxiety. Like, I hear the word alarmed a lot. Definitely, the neighborhood is alarmed. Everyone in San Francisco is alarmed. If we really are going to get to 30,000 units by 2020, that means 5,000 units a year, which is more than we've ever done in the last 20 years. It's going to be hard for every neighborhood. You've also already heard people asking for this legislation to be extended, which means that even if once it's passed here, it could reduce the uncertainty of the process. The uncertainty of whether it'll spread to other neighborhoods adds its own level of uncertainty to this process. I tell my members of the SF Bay Area Renters Federation that although it's wonderful, it's not enough to just go to other neighborhoods and ask for development there. Really achieving our goal, like how we act in a drought, requires a personal commitment on every single person's part to realize that there's going to be stuff happening around them that they're not comfortable with. Like, nobody is really comfortable with the fast pace of development in San Francisco. But like Victory Gardens or like drought relief, or even if you think the project is small and doesn't make a difference, every little bit counts. And making a commitment to deciding to be comfortable with the change that we're going under is really our only way forward. I have a letter from somebody else. Can I read it?
Sure.
Okay, because I'm out of my time.
Okay, then no.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. I mean, it's from someone who's at work.
But if you want to forward it,
Okay, yeah, do that.
if you want to email it, we can all look at it.
Michael Morris? All right, cool. Eric, you're up. Sue Vaughn, you're next. Leslie Kolech. Hiroshi, I can't read the last name. John Schwark.
I'm not here to speak on this matter.
Okay.
I'm here for the second item.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks like Eric is speaking on the third item. She was on the second item. Leslie.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Kelch, and I live on Corbett Avenue, and I've lived there. My husband and I have lived there since 1977. We're the third owners of a house that originally was 825 square feet and had 6 occupants. So 3,000 feet seems more than adequate for one family, for sure. And I really appreciate this legislation coming forward, and I thank Supervisor Wiener and hope you approve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Before I start, point of order. The third item for the housing element, I got a letter saying that it's going to be next week.
Yes,
So-
it will be.
My name is Hiroshi Fukuda, and I'm with the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods. And we haven't taken this matter up yet in regards to monster homes, but I think this is a long time coming. And I'm well, a little bit surprised that Supervisor Wiener has supported this, and I strongly urge you to pass this today. This is something that that the people in the neighborhoods very strongly value. The Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods are very strong in regards to preservation of quality of neighborhood and the preservation of the character of the neighborhood. And this will be a good start in that regard. But hello, we in the other parts of the city, we also want protection too, because monster homes are not just in Corona Heights. It already started and it's been going on for a number of years throughout San Francisco. So I hope that the supervisors take this very seriously and will support this and eventually expand it to other parts of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John Schwark.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is John Schwark. I'm also with the San Francisco Bay Area Renters Federation. I think I wanted to sum up some of our concerns that we've been discussing on our online forums. The first concern is, will this spread to every neighborhood in San Francisco now being entitled to legislation to preserve their neighborhood and their neighborhood's visual and economic character? We think this could be an impediment to adding the housing we need in the future. We should think carefully about whether the controls we are using to keep giant homes out could also be used to keep poor people out. Not only this legislation, but existing law and zoning do currently keep poor people out of the neighborhood in question. No one without a massive income could afford to buy a house or even rent in this area with or without the current legislation. And I say this with respect to all the people who are neighbors there. You guys all moved in and bought your houses 30 years ago when it was cheap, and you've actually moved out of the middle class because of the appreciation of those houses in many cases. Okay? As a basic issue of fairness, a lot of other neighborhoods are being asked to take things that are out of character for those neighborhoods. They generally aren't as white or as middle class as your neighborhood or as upper middle class as your neighborhood. I understand the opposition to big homes. That is a motivation here, but a fenced-off yard is not the equivalent of public open space. Too often charming well, I'll skip that part. If economic diversity is actually the goal of this legislation, and if residents really do support affordable housing in their neighborhood, as some have said, then let's add additional protections and incentives to this legislation that allow multifamily development exemptions that really increase density and remove the 45% yard requirement and height restrictions for high percentage or 33% affordable developments. All neighborhoods, not just the other neighborhoods in the eastern side and northern side of the city.
Next speaker is Hector Martinez, followed by Richard Goldman, followed by Fred Bove, followed by Mitzi Palmer. Hector.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Hector Martinez, and I live on State Street. Obviously, I'm opposed to these monster homes. The argument that you need a certain amount of space to be able to raise a family, I think, is misleading. I have two young children, 1 and 3 years old, and we live in a home that's less than half of what's being currently proposed for these new homes, and that's more than enough space. So this whole argument that more space needed for family, I think, is completely misleading. The other issue that I would like to raise is we recently went through this process with a proposal at 53 State Street through the Planning Commission, and I felt that as far as the planning department and the planning commission, there was no importance placed on affordability, and that's the big issue here. It's not simply about us not wanting more homes. We want either existing affordable homes to stay or affordable homes to be built. These are monster homes. I don't think anyone can afford these homes unless you're in the upper stratus as far as income, and that's very far and few between. So obviously I support this legislation, and I encourage that further legislation include all of State Street and surrounding areas and wherever else there's concern in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you. My name is Richard Goldman, and my wife and I live at 230 State Street in the midst of this area that's under consideration. I want to thank Supervisor Weiner for seeing a problem and doing something to try to address it. As Supervisor Weiner mentioned, this legislation is a reasonable approach, allowing some new development, but giving us time to take a closer look at the rapid growth occurring in our neighborhood and allowing for input from the neighborhood. Our neighborhood has many through lots with open space on one end and housing on the other, and it's something that gives a unique character to our neighborhood, is having this much open space and visibility to the neighbors as opposed to the mid-block open spaces. And this is something that I think many of the neighbors have said already and want to preserve. I just want to bring up one other, maybe not constituent, but one other group that is very interested in preserving the trees and the open space. Two of the projects that have been part of this, the impetus for this emergency legislation, currently have open space in their backyards, one of which has two very large significant trees that the developer originally did not call significant. We pointed that out, and now the Planning Commission has said that they need to save the trees. And I just want to see one of the reasons why is the Corona Height parrots. If we could have the overhead projector, please. The Corona Height parrots are in there. We can see one, two, turn it this way, make it easier. The different parrots up there, and then a little closer look where we can see the parrots here, here, and here. And these are another group that would very much appreciate being able to keep the open space in the neighborhood. So I ask that the committee support this legislation and recommend approval by the full board. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Fred, and then Mitzi.
Hi there, my name is Fred Beauvais. I'm here on behalf of Friends of Corona Heights Park. And I want to first commend you, Supervisor Weiner, for introducing this interim legislation. I moved on to Ord Court in 1985, and my late partner and I bought our place on State Street in 2000. And I have the pleasure of living across the street from the big development that's going up on State Street right by Corona Heights Park right now. It's a pattern. It's not just our neighborhood, but it's a pattern, as people have been mentioning, all over the city, where developers come in and take what they need and don't give anything back to the neighborhood. And the reason Corona Heights is so unique is that there are multi-unit dwellings. There are families living here. I've seen it most of my life. And it's one of the reasons people want to live in San Francisco. If we destroy that, we destroy the impetus for San Francisco becoming a destination where people want to live and work. We've seen housing bubbles come and go, and once this housing bubble breaks, are we going to be left with the shattered remnants of what was once a wonderful, unique neighborhood? That's a decision that we as the voters need to keep in our hands. So I encourage, first of all, I want to thank all my friends and neighbors that I see from the neighborhood for coming out today, and I want to encourage you to look at the ordinance once it's up to make sure that we all still have a voice in what goes on in our neighborhood. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Mitzi, followed by Annie Fryman.
Good afternoon. I'm Mitzi Palmer. I live at 312 Upper Terrace, directly across the street from a proposed project at 271 and 273 Upper Terrace. Thank you, Supervisor Weiner, for bringing this matter to everyone's attention. We in Mount Olympus are probably the last of the groups to be affected by this mega construction. Nothing has started yet. There are two small, modest structures across the street from me that were purchased by a developer for $4 million. And the property goes down to Roosevelt. So it's a slope that's pie-shaped, and the current proposal is to build 2 houses on Upper Terrace, 3 houses down below. The houses are to be between 6,000 and 7,000 square feet each. And the rumor is that there will be a lap pool and an elevator for cars. Now, this is so out of character for our neighborhood. Mount Olympus used to be the geographic center of the city, but when the southern borders shifted, we're not literally the geographic center, but we're on the Ridge Trail, and we have a lot of hikers that come up there. Most people don't know that we exist because it's a dead-end street. The street is so narrow that people think it's a one-way, and we regularly pull over for each other. So there is a lot of congestion. There are more and more delivery trucks all the time with Amazon and the delivery services of your vegetables and so forth. So we're already experiencing a huge influx of traffic, and I can only shudder at what this huge construction project. The other thing I want to mention is that the woman who lives right next door has yet to be contacted by the developer.
Thank you very much.
Hi there. My name is Annie Fryman. I live in an adjacent neighborhood to Corona Heights, and I'm also a member of the Bay Area Renters Federation. I'm reading this on behalf of Randall Leeds, the email that was sent. I'm very curious to know more about the DR and CU processes and how to weigh whether your legislation, Scott, would make the process for approvals smoother or more difficult for expansion projects. You said turning normal-sized homes into mega homes isn't adding new housing, though I have more than a few friends who live in co-housing arrangements in what decades ago were probably mega homes. Whether it's in-law units or more bedrooms, the net result is density and eventually more housing. Especially as opponents of large developments like the 16th and Mission Project express concerns about the vulnerability of local residents, it's important to stress that infill should happen everywhere and not be confined to certain neighborhoods. Otherwise, what we're talking about is NIMBYism distilled, not in my backyard, but over there where other people live. The Mission, but not Corona Heights. So I'm a little concerned that you seem to be suggesting that conditional use process is better, but not directly suggesting it makes these expansion projects easier. In fact, I worry that the implication is that it makes them harder, but that it's okay because these aren't adding new housing. Which one is it? I can't follow the message.
Thank you very much. Now, if there's any members of the public that would like to speak on item number 1, please come up. Please come up. Please come to the microphone.
My name is David Cannon. I live at 209 State Street. I have a building there that's 2 small apartments, total of 700 square feet each. And I am so proud of Supervisor Wiener. I've actually not been much supportive of him in the past, but when I saw this legislation, I just like, wow, this guy has got my vote. I am so proud of my neighbors who have gradually come together to start opposing these projects that are going in. I'm sitting at the dog park with my dog Rocket, and we're watching these developers clear-cutting these old-growth trees down right in the view of the dog park. Who is responsible for protecting these trees? Who's responsible for protecting the parrots? If you're going to give variances, let's give variances to studio apartments and 1-bedroom apartments. Who's buying these homes? Nobody. I don't hear anyone demanding trophy homes in the neighborhood. Let's build trophy homes. No, I go to all these meetings. I don't hear anyone supporting trophy homes. I hear people concerned that the neighborhood is being destroyed, the character of the neighborhood is destroyed, the environment is destroyed. This is not affordable housing. This is housing for people outside of the neighborhood. If we're going to give variances for buildings, let's give variances to apartment buildings that have studio apartments.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I'm Mark Reiser. I've been a resident in Corona Heights neighborhood since 1995 and a property owner, and I own one of the through lots that's been referred to.
Come on, Mark, I know you got a stronger voice than that.
I want to strongly
There it is.
support Supervisor Weiner's legislation, understanding it's not the final answer. It will help us reach a carefully considered solution to this. We'll balance all the interests, and I have confidence in the quality of the work that's done by Supervisor Weiner's office that we'll get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Jane Whitaker. I live directly across the street from the building that's being built there. I've lived in the neighborhood since 1961, so I've seen a lot of changes. And I just want to say that I'm just here to give some history. The house, I lived at 187, and the house next to me was built up on Roosevelt Way because at that particular time, the lots couldn't be any more than 25 by 75 feet. Since there's only 125 feet up to Roosevelt Way from State Street, you could only put one house on the top or one on the bottom. That's why that space is there. So when the fellow changed at 182, when he built up on Roosevelt Way and got a variance to build all the way down to State Street, that was like early 70s or late 60s. I knew this was going to come. Thank God it took this many years to get here. But I hope that we can stop what's happening now. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm Justin Del Versano. I've been in the neighborhood 39 years. Right now on 17th Street, abutting my property on the east side, was a single-family home that was under 1,000 square feet. It's being replaced by 5 units that'll be over 10,000 square feet. On the west side of my property was an open space. There were 2 flats there, 2 Victorian flats, and a single-family home beside that, and 33 condominiums were put into that space. So I'm being blocked in. I admire all the people who've come to speak here today, and I hope you give them your consideration for all the time and effort they've put and taken out of their lives to speak up here. And I want to thank you and thank Supervisor Weiner for this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. You as an individual can only speak for one person. If you'd like, you can forward your email so to be a part of this board file.
Even though I already had 45 seconds left on my last one.
Even though you walked away, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on item number 1? Item number 1? Oh, come on, before I close public comment.
I realize something now. When I speak too loud, too strongly, you get hungry soon. This is my experience. You know, get hungry, you speak too much. I got to go to Chinatown restaurant and eat my dinner. Such good evening, Supervisor Scott Wiener, 司徒云啊. Good evening, Supervisor Michael Heng, 郭蘭. Good evening, Supervisor Jane Kim, 金正賢. When I passed by the corridor, I met Supervisor Scott Wiener, 司徒云啊. And that remind me strongly of something happened like the natural cause of something should happen. But take it the way without too attention to format. In superior to the format, I mean you're detached. Spiritual release for example, spiritual soul and self-release for. The way Greek learning rests upon the principle of being brilliant or by yourself, or being good closeness to all people, or new all people, or rests upon the highest state of excellency. Only knowing how to be investing about the highest state of excellency can one be firm. Only knowing how to be firm can one be stillness of good standing. Only knowing to be in good standing of stillness can one be in good security. Only knowing how to be in good security can one be good reasoning of origin of wisdom. Only in true knowing of being in good reasoning of origin of wisdom can have 2 games of virtuousness. Material physics to having of origin of spirituality and ending matters. Worldly social function to have steps of developmental progress. In good knowing of such before in heaven and later in life, one is near the way of Tao. In ancient, or well a piece of war require good national management, family order, self-cultivation, have at heart, internal sincerity, philosophical and scientific thought, to have good knowing and understanding. Above such is being important, integral objective of self-wellness, of good cultivation. If not, just...
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to speak to item number 1? Okay, public comment is going to be closed. I want to just say a couple comments. I appreciate you guys, residents, coming out and engaging on this level, and I definitely want to echo some of the brief remarks that I heard from folks commenting. Is that this feeling, this pressure, this anxiety that you're feeling, I want to assure you that it's also happening in other parts of the city. My constituents in Potrero Hill are dealing with the same issues, as well as constituents in Visitation Valley. Oftentimes I hear from neighbors that the proposed expansion for homes, it's too large, it's too out of scope, it doesn't fit with the nature or the scope or the feel of the neighborhood. These are common things that I hear often. So I do also want to compliment Supervisor Weiner for his leadership on this particular interim zoning controls, and it's unfortunate, but it seems like that's interim zoning controls are one of the only tools that we have at our disposal to help correct some of the aggressive development that's been happening. So, Supervisor Weiner, I'm sure you have a couple comments that you'd like to speak to.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the remarks. I just want to, a few thank yous. I want to thank Andres Power in my office for doing a lot of great work and working with the neighbors and working with the planning department to put together these controls. I also want to thank the gentleman who showed us the photos of the parrots. I've been familiar with this neighborhood for almost 20 years. I had no idea that there were parrots in the neighborhood, so thank you for showing us that. And I want to thank the many people who came out today from the neighborhood and elsewhere, but largely from the neighborhood. I knew there was going to be a turnout today. I actually did not realize how many people were going to come out. And the people who came out today, by and large, were people I've never seen at City Hall ever before. These are not, there are some people who come to City Hall a lot advocating, which is not a judgment. There are a lot of terrific people who are here a lot advocating on important issues. These are just regular people who are not typically engaged in the business of this building, who are here because they care deeply about their neighborhood. One of the remarks that we heard over and over again was we're not opposed to development, that understand that we need more housing in the city, but that creating particularly massive single-family homes while having an impact on the neighborhood does not even really address our housing needs. I want to say to the representatives of the Bay Area Renters Federation who are here today, I have a lot of respect for the organization, and I'm really happy that there is an organization that is actively advocating for creating more housing in San Francisco, because for the future of our city and for the people who are here now, for the young people who are coming here, for people who grew up here and leave and want to come back and can't find a place to live, and for future generations of the people who've come to San Francisco, which has been the hallmark of the city, welcoming new waves of people coming here, we need to have enough housing to house those people. But I also want to say that I don't agree with the implication that this neighborhood and the people who are coming out today and who have been advocating for this legislation are somehow NIMBYs who are saying build all the housing elsewhere and don't do anything to touch our neighborhood. That's not what I've heard today, and it's not what I've been hearing and speaking with many of these neighbors. I will just note, for those who aren't familiar with the geography here, that a mere 3 blocks from this boundary, a mere 3 blocks, we hit Castro Market, where we begin to see either approved or already built development beginning at Castro Market, heading all the way up with about 1,000 units of housing. So this area is not some sort of isolated area. It is right on top of the Upper Market neighborhood, which is absorbing a significant amount of new housing. So it's not, and the people who came here today, these folks were not out fighting any of that development. Last year, as I mentioned at the beginning, we authored the Castro in-law unit legislation, which affects the bulk of this neighborhood. I don't recall a single one of these neighbors coming out and opposing that legislation. In fact, the neighborhood associations in the area, the same ones that are supporting this legislation, all came out in support of the in-law unit legislation because they knew and they know that we do need new housing, and adding in-law units into the existing envelope of buildings is a terrific and more affordable way of doing that. No one advocated to me that we should, in these interim controls, have some sort of lockdown where we prevent people from adding to their homes or building new units. No one took that position. Instead, everyone agreed, or I think largely agreed, with the flexible approach that we take, which allows for significant additions without going into the real mega home territory. And even then, it's not a ban. It simply requires a conditional use. Indeed, the gentleman who spoke near the end, who talked about how if you're going to grant variances for large buildings, at least have multi-unit buildings, which is exactly what housing advocates have been advocating for. Building a multi-unit building is a very different thing. It actually adds housing as opposed to turning a 1,200 or 1,400 foot single-family home into a 6,000 square foot single-family home. Yes, potentially, theoretically, in the future, that could become a co-housing situation, but largely those buildings are not co-housing, and it is generally not creating new housing. I also just want to note, in terms of the conditional use process, this is a process that already applies to an enormous amount of housing in San Francisco. In fact, whether it's at 16th and Mission or any of pretty much every building that goes up along Market Street is required to get a conditional use because we recognize that we want the housing, but when you're talking about adding large buildings, having that kind of public process is a valuable thing. And in fact, this neighborhood has embraced that development, has not opposed any of the buildings that have gone up along Market Street, has not used the conditional use process to argue for tiny buildings or for fewer units, but has used the conditional use process to try to negotiate for things like, for example, demanding on-site affordable housing or making sure that the design is a good design and one that is a good urban design. So this neighborhood, I just want to really dispel what we've been hearing from some, that this neighborhood is somehow a NIMBY, not in my backyard. Don't you dare do anything in my backyard. Do it all in the Mission or do it somewhere else. That is absolutely false. This neighborhood has absorbed more density, is continuing to absorb more density, but also wants to retain what is amazing about this neighborhood, which is the absolute, the beauty, the green space, and you can have both. You can create housing, which I have advocated for, while also respecting the fabric of neighborhoods, and that is an important balance for us to always keep in mind. So colleagues, I do have amendments which I distributed. These are not substantive amendments. They largely provide greater, more detailed guidance to the Planning Commission when they consider projects under certain circumstances. And so I would make a motion to adopt the amendments and make a further motion to forward item 1 to the full board as a committee report with positive recommendation.
Oh, Supervisor Kim?
I was just going to second the amendments
Okay.
and make a motion to move forward with recommendation as a committee report.
Okay, so a motion's been made by Supervisor Wiener, seconded by Supervisor Kim, and this motion passes unanimously. Okay, we're going to go on to item number 2. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 2?
Item number 2 is a resolution urging the Municipal Transportation Agency Board.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Wiener is the author of this item. Supervisor Wiener is the author of item number 2.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for agendizing this item as well. Colleagues, today before us is a resolution regarding our commuter shuttle pilot program, and specifically requesting that the MTA, in issuing permits for this program, consider the existence or lack thereof of labor harmony. Colleagues, our commuter shuttle program has proven to be a great way to keep cars off of our streets and reduce our overall greenhouse gas footprint. As a result of these employee shuttles, workers who live in San Francisco and commute to offices either outside the city or inside the city, and who would otherwise own and drive private automobiles, are now able to live car-free, getting us one step closer to the transit-first city we want to be. But while most of the conversations about these shuttles have focused on the people who ride the buses, today we want to discuss the men and women behind the wheel who are driving these vehicles. These shuttles are operated by private companies that contract with large employers. Drivers work for the private shuttle operators. They don't work for Google or Apple or Facebook or LinkedIn or Genentech or UCSF. These drivers are typically behind the wheel for 8 hours a day during morning and evening commutes, with standby time of up to 4 to 6 hours between morning and evening shifts. These standby times are often unpaid, and because these drivers may live in other parts of the Bay Area, they do not have the option of going home during these standby times. They usually have to wait in the bus in the middle of the day, not getting paid. Today we'll hear from a few folks who will talk to us about how challenging these shifts can be. Navigating our city streets, driving up and down our highways is not easy. But just as important, because private shuttle operators share muni bus stops, it's important that we as a city do as much as we can to minimize the risk of disruption to our public transportation system caused by any labor disputes. A labor dispute for these shuttle companies could cause gridlock and undermine the flow of our public transportation system. This resolution calls on the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency to adopt a provision that would require commuter shuttle operator permittees to demonstrate labor harmony or lack thereof with their drivers when submitting for a permit to stop in bus zones. The resolution does not define what labor harmony is, and I look forward to working with the MTA board as it crafts a definition that is broad and encompasses various approaches for a shuttle operator to demonstrate a commitment to minimize the impact to our transportation system of potential labor dispute and ensuring fair treatment of the men and women who drive these shuttles. Colleagues, I do have minor technical amendments that I will introduce or that I will distribute now and that I will ask that we adopt after public comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much, Supervisor Weiner. We're going to go now into public comment. I have a few comment cards here. Sue Vaughn, I've got you up first. There's Doug Bloch, second, and Mark Gleason, third. Welcome back.
Okay, good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Sue Vaughn. I'm here to ask you to amend the labor harmony resolution. You should support the unionization of the shuttle bus drivers, but strike out all reference to the commuter bus pilot program and policy, which is illegal, as it is in violation of the California Vehicle Code. I congratulate the newly unionized shuttle bus drivers, but I do believe that the operators of the shuttle buses want to operate their vehicles within the law. Those who pull their buses into muni bus stops do so in violation of the California Vehicle Code. And for the sake of clarity, I have brought copies of the Vehicle Code, which is explicit in its language, prohibiting any but common carriers and school buses in public bus stops. There are good reasons private shuttle buses should not be permitted to operate in the muni bus stops, and I have explained some of those reasons in an op-ed that I wrote with former SFMTA Director Bruce Oka, and that op-ed appeared in the Chronicle on Friday, and I have copies of that as well. And I will ask the clerk to make everything I give you part of the public record. On the back of the op-ed are copies of the Assembly Bill 61, introduced by Assemblyman Travis Allen, Republican of Huntington Beach in Southern California. AB 61, which I oppose, would privatize our bus stops by making the occupation of the shuttles in muni bus stops legal. This should be of concern to you and all other San Franciscans, as the SFMTA expects the demand for permits to operate in private shuttles and mini bus stops to increase. Private shuttles should be in transit hubs. Better yet, we should just expand public transportation. Congratulations to the newly unionized shuttle operators.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Mark Gleason. I'm a principal officer of Teamsters Local 665 in San Francisco. First of all, I'd like to thank Supervisor Wiener for his work on this important issue. He has described eloquently today and in this morning's Chronicle the effort that is designed to keep muni buses moving smoothly while supporting the efforts to take private cars off of the street. It's undeniable that the commuter shuttle program has been a success in reducing reliance on private vehicle traffic in San Francisco. However congested all of us feel San Francisco's city streets are now, rest assured they would be much more so if the workers who rely on the shuttles to travel to the offices outside of the city were all driving private cars. As the city considers making this program permanent, we are glad the city is taking into consideration how the relationship between the drivers and shuttle companies could impact our transportation network. This resolution is an important step forward, and we look forward to working with the SFMTA as they consider how to structure a permanent program in advance of the expiration of the pilot program. And again, I would emphasize again, we thank you very much, all of you, for considering this legislation.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Doug Block, and I'm with Teamsters Joint Council 7, which covers 100,000 Teamsters in Northern California. And I would like to thank Supervisor Wiener for putting forth this resolution. I was asked to give an update on the organizing efforts of the drivers in this industry. And unfortunately, we had two drivers from Compass Transportation, one who lives in the supervisor's district who had to go back to work but hoped to join us today. They are two of 140 drivers that service Yahoo, Apple, and eBay, who voted to join our union just a few weekends ago. The one driver actually picks up Yahoo people here at Muni bus stops. And they joined nearly 90 Facebook drivers for a company called Loop Transportation that not only organized with us, but negotiated contracts that are going to bring people on average $9 an hour wage increases, family paid health care, 5 weeks of paid vacation, pension, and more benefits, especially for the issue of split shifts, which the supervisor mentioned. There are drivers from dozens of other companies, including just about every company that has a permit under the pilot program, who are talking to us, who want to organize. And we support this resolution because in the course of the organizing, we would hate for any of this campaign to impede with the normal business of Muni picking up hundreds of thousands of people every day. So thank you, City and County of San Francisco, for your leadership on this issue, and to Supervisor Wiener for putting this forward.
Great, thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on item number 2? Please come up.
Thank you, supervisors. I'm Cynthia Cruz with the San Francisco League of Pissed Off Voters. The League, as you know, are part of the group that are fantastic people that you see here regularly. Rather than people who may not understand or know what's happening with the minutia, what's happening in committees. And so we keep an eye on things. And we've been watching for the past 2 years the shuttle bus program. Excuse me. So I just want to reiterate, because it will get skewed, that the league has never said that we're against the shuttle bus program. We've always just said, hey, tech buses, just pay your fair share. We want the program to be legal, and right now it is illegal with the vehicle code. AB 61 outlines, just in putting forth language that would legalize it, that this is illegal. When we spoke earlier on the tech bus program, we noted a number of things that do keep this from being a good pilot program for the city. One is that it's on streets with that are unsafe for pedestrians and bicyclists. We would like for it to move out of the red zones and into white zones to lessen the impact to Muni. I really understand why Supervisor Wiener is bringing forth this resolution, because these companies are really famous for just moving to the next best thing that's cheaper in terms of wages. And when there's not labor harmony, we're looking at companies that will just drop the drivers that have just unionized. And that's important, but it's also important that we're talking about a program that's legal. And I would suggest that you put forth amendments that do make this program safer. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on item number 2? Okay, seeing none, item number 2, public comment for item 2 was closed, and Supervisor Wiener had a couple of amendments.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to everyone who came out today. I'd like to make 2 motions. First, to move the amendments that I've distributed, and second, I'd like to, once we do amend that, move that we forward the resolution as amended with positive recommendation to the full board to be heard on March 24th.
Okay. Those amendments have been unanimously accepted. Thank you very much.
And then the motion to forward.
And the motion to forward to the March 24th meeting has also been accepted unanimously. Thank you very much for your leadership on this resolution. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 3?
Item number 3 is a hearing to report on the status of double parking.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm excited about this hearing. Okay, double parking, something that affects all of us in our daily lives as we live here in San Francisco. Supervisor Wiener is also the author of this item, and we've got city departments that will be presenting to us this afternoon. Supervisor Wiener, any opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for colleagues for all 3 items today. So, colleagues, today I've called for a hearing to discuss and receive an update relating to double parking and double parking enforcement in San Francisco. You may recall, I think we were all the same membership of this committee, that about a year and a half ago we held an oversight hearing on double parking, and it's time to hear what, if anything, has changed in terms of the MTA and SFPD's approach to addressing this issue. Double parking, to be quite frank, is absolutely rampant in San Francisco. We see it with delivery trucks. We see it with private automobiles. We see it with taxi cabs. We see it over and over again. No one is saying that double parking is inappropriate 100% of the time. There are times when double parking is unavoidable. For example, when a delivery truck has nowhere to pull over. And in fact, delivery trucks have a partial exemption under the vehicle code from the prohibition on double parking if there's nowhere for them to pull over and if they are not blocking a public transportation vehicle. However, what we see in San Francisco goes well beyond that limited situation. We have developed a culture where many people think that it's appropriate to effectively leave their car in the middle of the street. And we see double parking all over, and it causes a lot of problems. It is not uncommon to see a single double parked car causing a multi-block traffic jam in San Francisco. It's not uncommon to see a double-parked vehicle block a Muni bus and even shut down an entire Muni line. It is not uncommon to see a double-parked vehicle in a bike lane, and as a result, to see cyclists have to maneuver around into the flow of traffic rather than stay in the bike lane. In fact, unfortunately, as we build out more bike lanes in San Francisco, it appears that those bike lanes are viewed by some as an invitation to double park, as if it were an additional parking lane. What we heard a year and a half ago was that there is remarkably little double parking enforcement in San Francisco. We saw that on certain stretches, for example, the entirety of 16th Street, the entirety of Castro/Divisadero Street, and a few other streets, that there were on average 1 or 2 double parking tickets per day, when we know that on those streets and others, there is dramatically more double parking than that. Double parking is a real issue, and double parking needs to be addressed. It's not enough when the worst case scenario for a double parker is that once in a while a police officer or parking control officer will come up and ask you to move on. That provides no disincentive whatsoever from double parking if the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to be told to move. Without more consistent enforcement, and that includes the issuance of citations, there will be no credible downside to double parking, and we will continue to see rampant double parking in the city. San Francisco is growing, our streets are becoming more congested and crowded, and now more than ever it is critical that we as a city effectively manage our transportation system. That means better enforcement, for example, of blocking the box, which I know is starting to happen. It also means more effective enforcement against double parking, and not just downtown, but throughout the city. So today, the MTA and SFPD will be reporting and providing us with data about the status of double parking enforcement in the city compared to our previous hearing. So I think it'll be fiscal year to fiscal year, and I'm very interested to see how they compare and to taking it from there. So, colleagues, if there are no additional opening comments, I would suggest, Madam Chair, that we proceed to the MTA for an initial presentation.
Great, sounds good to me. MTA, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Cameron Sammy, Enforcement Manager, MTA. So today I'd like to provide you with a report, the status on our enforcement efforts on double parking. I'd first like to refresh you with the California Vehicle Code, the law, and as Supervisor Wiener indicated, there are some limitations, but we certainly are able and capable of dealing with those limitations to the degree that we can. The California Vehicle Code for double parking, 22500H, clearly states that no car, no vehicle shall stop or park or stand, whether attended or unattended. And that's the key, whether they're actively loading or unloading. The exception is California Vehicle Code 22502, which does allow commercial vehicles to the degree, a reasonable amount of time, to actively load or unload. The enforcement practices differ with commercial vehicles and passenger vehicles. The commercial vehicles may be enforced if there is legal space available and they've chosen not to take it. Yellow zone, meter, white zone, what have you. There's no evidence of actively loading or unloading. They're creating a hazard, and that's key here, whether it's roadway vehicles or bicycles. And that goes to, again, Mr. Wiener, Supervisor Wiener, your point about bicycle lanes. There's more of them. And if there is a request to move and they choose not to move, they will be cited. And vehicles clearly that are blocking Muni will be cited.
And I'm sorry, can I just interrupt you briefly there? You just made a comment, if they're asked to move and refuse to move, then they will be cited. That sort of goes to, I think, the comment I made before, and actually we heard this a year and a half ago, that there's always a request to move first, and then if you don't move, you're cited. And I just would like to know the MTA's view on that. That says to me that in general, the worst thing that's going to happen to you if you're unlucky enough that a PCO or police officer sees you double parked and comes up to you, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to be asked to move. And then presumably most people are going to move once they're asked, and if you don't, that's life. But how is that a disincentive if the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to be asked to move?
Well, again, the first couple of conditions, if there is legal space, they will be asked to move into that space. Failure to do so will mean citation. We will issue a citation.
No, I understand, but you're saying that first you're going to ask them to move and give them the opportunity. And I guess the question is, if the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to be asked to move, why is that? How is that in any way a disincentive for double parking? I may as well double park because the worst thing that's going to happen to me is someone's going to ask me to move, and maybe I'm a little uncomfortable about that, but there's no penalty, right. And that's my question. How is that a disincentive?
It's not a disincentive, but it is clear that if there are the other options that they could have taken and didn't take, they can and will be cited. If it's a hazard, there's not going to be a question of whether it will be cited. So I think, again, the limited cases that they won't be cited, but there is the law that gives them some room. If there are no places to go, they're not creating a hazard, they can do that for the limited period of time to actively load or unload. So if we don't have some flexibility, some leverage, commerce won't happen.
It's not just, we're also talking about just private vehicles and...
No, and I'm not talking about private vehicles. The next one, passenger vehicles. There's no discretion. We don't, unless, the only exception that I'll say there is if they're actively loading a passenger vehicle, a disabled person or elderly, period. Otherwise, they will get cited. Okay? The next slide provides the annual statistics for 2010 through 2014. And I've included in this the bike lanes, something I didn't do last year, because it is key to our enforcement and eliminating very similar double parking. While the citations for 2014 did go down, bike lanes citations went up. The primary cause for this has been staffing. And we were, through normal attrition, early 13, for about 6 months, we were down about 33 positions. And we filled those positions. It took about 6 months to come up to speed, the training, the learning, and we were then down approximately 26, which we then filled in 2014.
So double parking for blocking bike lanes went down in 2014?
No.
Or excuse me,
went up.
Citations for double parking in 2014 for blocking bike lanes were down from 2013?
Yes, by 2,191 citations. So comparing 13 to 14, 14 was down.
And you're saying
for
that
double
was
parking
because of understaffing?
Correct.
And that's been corrected?
It has been corrected. Bikes, but again, blocking the bike lane, they actually went up. Okay. Next slide. Comparison of the double parking by violation or by vehicle type. Last year, in the September hearing, on the trucks and commercial vehicles, we went from 62% to 53%. That's a reduction of 9% in citations. So the citation numbers went down for commercial trucks by 9%. For passenger vehicles, they went up from 33% in 13 to 46%, or a 13% increase.
That's in the total mix, not the number of citations.
No, that's the number of citations for broken down by commercial and passenger vehicles. This is the total complement of citations.
Right. The percentage of overall citations to passenger vehicles increased from 33% to 46%.
Correct.
But was that an increase in the gross number of citations?
No, it was not. Just a shift in the citations from one type to another.
Okay, but overall the number of citations went down.
Correct. We again look at the top 16 double parking citations, and the majority, if not all of those, are Muni Corridor. And Mission is one of the top in terms of citation issuance. It is a problem, especially when you add construction. A lot of construction going on all over the city, south of Market. It creates a larger problem for us and for vehicles to find parking. The other locations, in many of them, the citation count went up in some of these other locations. The other thing to point out is that we actually started going further out of the downtown corridor, where observations or complaints by others have come through our office, and we've evaluated them and deployed PCOs out there to them, Valencia being one of them.
And these citations, do they represent both MTA and SFPD?
The breakdown is about 92, 93% MTA and about 7% PD. That's pretty consistent. And the remainder is just a small number, 5 or 6 per month, of Muni and taxi inspectors.
Right, but SFPD numbers are included?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Roughly 7%.
And why is SFPD such a tiny amount?
I can't answer that, but I know that if Captain or Commander Maddox could be here, she would inform you that it is an important enforcement to her and to her officers. Their focus has been historically different, and they're spending quite a bit of time lately, their traffic side, on gridlock.
Okay, so it seems like there's very, very little double parking enforcement from SFPD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have the answer for that.
Well, I mean, if 93% of the double parking citations are issued by MTA,
correct,
that seems like a pretty overwhelming majority by MTA.
Correct.
Okay.
The next slide, Supervisor Weiner, you requested to see these specific streets, and in all cases, probably but 18th Street, citations have gone down in those streets. And again, we're talking a total 2,191 citations down from the previous year. Some staffing, some others, it's focused on other streets. Next slide is a trend since the last hearing, the September 30th hearing. And as you can see, the red line is double parking citations, and the trend on that is going up, as well as blocking the bike lane. Both are going up. Comparing February 2015 to February 14, we saw a 69% increase in citation issuance for double parking. For blocking the bike lane citations, it was 139% increase compared to February of 2014. Some of the things that we've done on the next slide, what I call the emphasis, the communications and training. We actually started after the last hearing a small group of PCOs, parking control officers, to perform targeted or enhanced enforcement in areas that there were high volume of complaints and or observations, including Muni. So we did that through November 13th and 2014. In 2014, I established another detail in conjunction with the bike lane, residential parking, those things that are complaint-driven, and tried that out for a while as well. It was evident to me that in some locations where we put in a detail and targeted, that citations actually dropped. In part, when drivers that are inclined to double park see a PCO, they tend not to double park. So by the nature of our presence is a deterrence. For the commercial, many times, and I've talked to a lot of the commercial drivers, deliveries, they feel that it's the cost of doing business. And so they accept the citation and continue to do what they need to do. We trained a lot of new PCOs in 2014. That training is a time, it takes time to get the PCOs up to speed, to learn what to do, what the laws are, what the laws aren't. And we achieved pretty much fully staffing by the end of 2014. Through the year from 13, 14, we continue to reissue and train PCOs on double parking, the hazards of it. So the bulletins are continuously going out. The communications currently continuously going out. In August of 2014, the shuttle pilot detail began. With that, we had more PCOs, eyes on the road, so our saturation was higher, and we're able to focus not only on violators in the shuttle, the bus stops, Muni stops, but also anywhere along those corridors that have been problematic or that have individuals that are double parking. And again, in December, the mayor issued, with emphasis on congestion management strategy that involved both blocking the box, but also double parking. So the awareness is there. I believe our efforts, with the training, continuous reinforcement of it, we're seeing an increase in citation issuance. But I'd like to be clear that citation issuance doesn't always achieve compliance. And we've noticed or observed that in certain areas as well. So, to summarize, targeted enforcement has and is shown to have some limited short-term impact for commercial vehicles, again, because, as they would say, the cost of doing business. Targeted enforcement, special details, really works well with complaints, such as sidewalk complaints, such as residential parking permit enforcement. Much more difficult with double parking, again, because the violators see us coming, they know it's a steep fine, and they leave. Or they just don't do it. It's not to say they don't do it, and it still happens. It happens a lot. So utilizing the existing PCOs on their beats, whether they're performing general enforcement meters, whether it's RPP, residential parking, yellow zones, tow, whether they're on a complaint detail, they've been trained, they've been informed, they've been told to pick up any double parking violator. Don't pass it by. A lot of times if they're on a tight schedule to get to a street cleaning detail, we ask them to handle the double parking. And then the last slide is more of background information. What I wanted to convey here is that the red line is the double parking citations, and the green line is the fine amount. As you can see, the fine amount went from $80 to $100 to $110, about all in a few months, 3 months, January, well, through June, July. Pretty quick increase in fine or bail amount for double parking. And, we wonder at what point will folks start to feel the pinch of receiving a citation.
In terms of raising the amount?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just give my perspective on that. I don't think raising the fine is the problem. $110 or $80 or whatever it might be is enough to deter people. And what's missing is not having a higher and higher and higher fine amount. What's missing is consistent enforcement. Mm-hmm. And we seem to have a trend in some areas around various traffic violations where instead of just consistently enforcing the law, we keep jacking up the penalty to the point where the people who are penalized, sometimes it can be a massive hardship. We see some tickets that are up at $600, $700, $800, which is enough to cause huge hardship for some people. And I just and I sound a little bit like a broken record, but there just appears to be very little double parking enforcement, period. And I know, and it was down in 2014 compared to 2013. It seems to be maybe trending back up.
Correct.
A bit now. And I know, staffing is what it is. I understand it's challenging when you're understaffed. But this is all in the broader context of a long-term, I think, neglect by the city in terms of really focusing or doing much of anything to deal with double parking. It is, I think, absolutely the Wild West. And I think small increases or decreases in double parking enforcement doesn't move the dial. I would like to see a much, much more significant commitment from the MTA, from the SFPD, to have more consistent double parking enforcement in numerous parts of the city. And it's very frustrating to me. I know it's very frustrating to a lot of people when we hold these hearings, we ask for more enforcement, and then people day to day go around and still get caught up in a huge traffic jam because one person decided they were going to double park, or the J Church line gets shut down, which happened last year or the year before. Entire line gets shut down because one double parked vehicle blocked that track. Or over and over again, you see a cab that could easily pull over into a curb cut to pick someone up. It just stops in the middle of the street, and everyone has to stop behind them while someone gets in or out of a cab. It's a culture of just I'll leave my car where I want to leave it, I'll stop my car where I want to stop it, and no one's going to do anything about it because there is so little enforcement. So what can we expect going forward, not just to have a little, a little upward trend in double parking enforcement, but a meaningful shift in how the city approaches double parking enforcement?
Well, first of all, I do take it seriously. And you do have my commitment to put the resources that I can into double parking. But there are other balances that we have to recognize. There are people that pay for permits, and they want their areas enforced. They pay for that. So we have to ensure that we enforce residential parking as well. Meters, there's only so many meters. There's only so much parking space in this city. There are a lot of other things that we can do, not just enforcement. Not that I'm trying to diminish the importance of enforcement, because I agree, it is important. But I always go back to the 3 E's, education and engineering as well. We need to do everything that we can to ensure that there's sufficient yellow zones in the right places, in the right time frames for people, for vehicles, for commercial vehicles to deliver their goods. We're in a society that everybody is buying off the web. How do we expect people to deliver these goods and receive these goods if we don't find solutions to that? Education, I think that we can always do a better job in educating. And we can educate schools, we can educate faith-based community, we can educate a lot of folks, business community, to the facts that double parking is not an acceptable practice, and then enforce it. But I also I don't have unlimited resources. I would prefer to have more people out there in places where the observations made, whether it's Muni, whether it's the Bike Coalition, and we're working with the Bike Coalition, at least communicating to the degree that they are letting me know which locations have some of the biggest problems. I say whether it's top 10 or whether it's top 16. And we've actually put a lot of resources into some of those locations. And does that take away from other enforcement areas? Possibly, yes. But I'm willing to make that commitment to the degree that I have the resources to do that. And I will do that.
Well, and clearly parking enforcement matters, and I know enforcement resources aren't unlimited, but it seems like what you're saying, that the enforcement function appears to be understaffed. If enforcing residential parking restrictions and meters means that double parking is not being adequately enforced. And I'll say it's not the blocking the bike lanes it's a real issue, and it's important, but it goes well beyond that. And I know that the Bike Coalition does a good job in terms of reporting some of the hot spots, but understandably the focus is going to be on blocking bike access and the bike network. There are a lot of other streets that are not usual biking streets.
Correct.
I mean, you drive down Bush Street or Pine Street, where I think most people probably don't bike very much, and you'll have double parking that causes big traffic jams.
Right.
And it's about Muni as well. So I'm not reassured by your answer, and I know you don't appropriate your own budget in terms of your staffing, but I am interested in knowing from the agency in terms of what the plans are to have enough of the enforcement resources so that there can be consistent double parking enforcement, because right now there isn't enough.
Okay. And so part of that is we are looking, and we're working with a consulting firm to help us develop the tools that will give us some sense of what the right level. It doesn't make sense to me to just say, I need more people on double parking without an understanding of what I have to give up for it. So we are looking at a tool that will help us through that process. It's more of an optimization tool. And from that, I hope to be able to say, I've got these resources and we can only do this much. And with that is the story then, a defensible story to either grow my resources or keep it the same.
I mean, I think that my thought is that the agency should figure out these are the resources we need to do an effective job consistently enforcing double parking restrictions, and then working back from there. What do we need to do to get to that resource level without undermining other important functions? To me, that seems to be what would make the most sense.
I understand that.
Is that the end of the presentation?
That's it. Any other questions? Be happy to answer them.
Any other questions? Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a few questions. One, actually, our office got a couple of photos of commuter shuttle bus programs, shuttle buses that are using bike lanes and other places to kind of drive and drop off folks at, which is not part of what they're supposed to do given the new program. And I'm curious what education your department is doing with the commuter shuttle buses to ensure that they don't do that.
So working with the program manager, Carly Payne, we're actually reaching out to the providers of these shuttles and letting them know, educating them of the right and wrong, what not to do. So through that education, if they do it right, there's no citations.
Mm-hmm. How many commuter shuttle buses have you cited since the pilot has started?
A lot.
A lot. Okay.
Yeah, no, seriously, a lot.
That's good to know. I mean, I got photos just last week of shuttle buses using the green bike lane on Market Street.
Right. It's more the enforcement of others, too, that don't have permits that we're citing, but we are citing a lot of both non-providers and providers.
Okay, that's great to hear. I know they're not the only category. I only asked about that group because SFMTA is specifically permitting this group of drivers and vehicles, and it's a new program. So we just want to make sure that it's as successful as possible, and that we committed to our residents that if we created a regulatory scheme for these vehicles, that in exchange we would make sure that they were driving safely, that there were pedestrians and cyclists and not doing things like blocking bike lanes, but using the stops that we have allocated for them.
Correct.
And then second, kind of separate from this, but another kind of, I think, innovative expansion of SFMTA's enforcement. I really appreciate the work that's happening around double parking, and I just want to concur with Supervisor Wiener. We have more to do, and I really push and encourage the department to do more. But I also know that we have been pushing your department to do Don't Block the Box.
Correct.
Traffic citations. And, it's been great that we've made that pilot permanent now as of December. And being that it's along similar lines, cars blocking traffic in a different part of the intersection, the quote-unquote box between the crosswalks. I haven't gotten an update since the pilot has become permanent in December, and I'm just wondering how that program is going. I know that's under your guidance and leadership as well.
Yes, that's also doing very well, meaning, prior to the pilot that we did last summer, we were issuing somewhere around 150 to 300 citations a month for gridlock turning. And we have increasingly moved that number up. Last month, we did somewhere around 950.
Wow.
So it's a lot.
That's great to hear. Have you noticed a significant improvement in traffic flow in the south of Market?
That's hard because I don't think there is any. There's no silver bullet, but I think at some intersections, I've gone out there, I've looked at it. I certainly can't gauge it by the citations because it's such a problem area, and I think it's been, as Supervisor Weiner stated about double parking, it's been a problem for a lot of years. It's hard to say. I think it's still early to tell.
Okay. No, I appreciate that, and I would love the data points on how that program is doing.
Yeah.
I know it just started since December, but I'm just curious about what the results have been, and it's great to hear about the increase in number of
Right.
citations in that program. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. I have
Yeah.
just a quick question. One of the concerns that I have that I see are the drivers with Uber and Lyft completely disregarding traffic rules. What type of enforcement? I would imagine it's the same level of enforcement, the same type of enforcement that you would enforce upon any private person in a vehicle blocking traffic to pick up and or deliver a fare to the curb. Instead, what you see is them stopping in the middle of the street.
Correct.
And I was looking at your presentation, and I see the numbers. I'm a little bit surprised that I see a trend where the numbers in 2014 seem to be decreasing, at least in some different parts of the streets, particularly
Correct.
the ones I was looking at are in the southeast. Is that just because you've concentrated and focused your enforcement on a different part of San Francisco?
That's correct. We try to get the best intelligence that we can, whether it's from our own officers, whether it's from a group, again, like the Bike Coalition, or through supervisors' offices, through complaints. But yes, that is correct. We've actually we end up moving from one location to another. And that's the sort of the I'll call it a problem with putting a detail together to only focus on double parking when I have a lot more officers out there doing their regular assignments who can look for those types of violations.
So how do you determine where to concentrate your resources?
Well, certainly along Muni corridors, that's key. The bike lanes, the painted bike lanes, a lot of combination of residential, light industrial, commercial, like on Mission, Valencia now, that's bike. So primarily Muni, bike, and where you have a combination of commercial, Muni, bike, residential.
And are you starting to track the number of violations that are incurred by Uber drivers or Lyft drivers?
Yes. As you may know or not, they don't have any identifiable mark that says they're a Uber, Lyft, sidecar, what have you. Other than, in some cases, the Uber has the little U in the front passenger window.
Right.
Sidecar has its own little appearance on the side mirrors. When we are able to recognize what type of vehicle it is, we established a code, and I believe it was back in must have been June or July of last year, and we've been reporting that out to Kate Torin, who has been meeting with the state PUC on how to better handle that whole situation. So citations have gone up considerably.
You mean the number of citations?
The number of citations.
Is there a way to increase the penalty to discourage, particularly those that are in the sharing transportation economy, to dissuade them from violating, everyday traffic laws?
Well, I don't know how we would do that
I imagine that's a state law.
Yeah,
Supervisor
when they're getting whatever citation that they're violating, whether it's a double parking, whether it's not paying a meter, so it's hard to say. They're not any different than a regular vehicle. So unless we have the ability to recognize them, and yes, maybe at the state or
Well,
maybe local ordinance.
I think I
don't know.
disagree a little bit. I think that we
Okay.
do have the ability to recognize them because when they're on duty, they either have a pink mustache, sidecar will have a little
Right.
covering on their rear view mirror or their side panel mirror for their car, and Uber has the illuminated U on the windshield. So, and it's also very obvious who's doing what when you see someone flagging and they're getting in the car and or leaving. So I do believe that there is some distinction between an everyday driver and an Uber. We'll use Uber as an example, or Lyft driver, and any other business that's growing that I'm unaware of.
And I agree, and sometimes now the mustaches have been getting smaller.
Yes.
They're no longer on the grill, they're in the dash.
That's correct.
And the U is over there. Sometimes they get covered up. To the degree that we can get them, the officers don't always have the luxury of moving around the car looking for identifiable labeling.
They will also have there's identifying questions that they would ask when they pull someone over.
Well, we don't pull people over. We violate for the parking, so they may not be with the car.
I see. Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments, Supervisor Wiener?
Thank you. So, in follow-up to Supervisor Cohen's comments, I think it's fair to say, at least this is my experience, that double parking is a pretty equal opportunity endeavor. And while there are certainly plenty of Uber, Lyft, et cetera, ride-sharing cars that either double park or stop in the middle of the street to pick up or drop off a fare, there are also plenty of taxis that do that as well. And there are plenty of just private automobiles that do it. And there are delivery trucks, and it just runs the gamut. So my perspective is that it's really about all vehicles. I really don't care if it's someone's just driving their car, or it's Uber, it's a cab, or it doesn't matter. They're blocking traffic. That's just my perspective. I guess I would make a request to the MTA. I would really like to know, maybe have just a report back, not in a hearing, but a report back about what the MTA's plan is to have adequate resources to do sufficient and consistent double parking enforcement. And again, I'm not suggesting that resources be pulled off of other enforcement endeavors, but if the agency needs to staff up, then it needs to staff up. So would 60 days be sufficient to have that report back from the agency? And because I know again, you don't generate your own budget. That's generated by senior management of the MTA and the MTA Board of Directors. And so I'd want it to be from the agency as a whole, so that we know what is the plan to make sure there are enough resources to do double parking enforcement.
Okay.
So 60 days sufficient?
Yes.
Okay, I appreciate it. Madam Chair, the SFPD was supposed to be here. They are not here. I thought they were on
I'm sorry,
their
the
way.
SFPC said?
SFPD.
Oh, SFPD.
They say they're on their way. I don't see them here.
They had to leave, yes. Supervisor, they had to leave.
Right, they're sending someone.
Oh, are they? Okay,
yeah.
sorry.
So I would suggest we do public comment, and then if they are here, we can hear from them after public comment. If not, then we can not hear from them.
Public comment is short today on this item. Thank you very much for your presentation
Thank
today.
you.
We're going to go ahead and move into public comment at this time. So public comment is open. I have 3 public comment cards. We have John, Chambray, Howard, and Eric. Okay, come on, John. And Howard and Eric, you guys can queue up and so we can get going. All right.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Scott Wiener for bringing this important issue before the board and the MTA. I have recently even sent Scott some emails about this, as well as some photographs that I've been starting to take of double-parked vehicles and their license plate numbers, and I would hope that perhaps the MTA might consider civilian reporting of these violations as a way to let's say we become the traffic cameras of our local neighborhoods, and they can send out tickets to these folks and see if we can't get some more citation monies from these violators. I think because of the ever-increasing traffic and the growing population in San Francisco and the constant reduction of street parking, let me point out what's going to happen to Polk Street with another 140 parking places being removed. Get ready to put more resources there because you're going to see a lot more double parking. I hear what the MTA is saying. I don't believe that there should be any exemptions, partial exemptions or otherwise. As a private individual, when I had remodeling done on my home, it was my job to get permits and pay for them, to have parking so that my contractors could park in front of my home while they did their remodeling. I think that storekeepers, commercial people should have to do the same thing.
They do.
I also would like to say that I walk a lot, and I'm perfectly willing to take these pictures and make reports to the board or the MTA. I would also like to say that it's not just cars and commercial vehicles. The San Francisco Fire Department and the San Francisco Police Department notoriously park in front of stores and coffee shops to run in and get their snacks. I don't call that an emergency.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Next speaker is Howard.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Howard Strasser. I'm a member of SF True. First, I want to thank the supervisor for calling this hearing. And then I want to launch into the importance of eliminating double parking for Muni riders and Muni itself. Now, Muni is becoming a billion-dollar business, and a typical line is about 40 minutes. And if double parked cars add a minute to the running time, that's like 2.5%, say 2%. That's on the average, you're talking about $20 million a year just because people want to double park. And so that shouldn't go on. And then there's the importance, the ability, if you don't have enough enforcement officers to find out who's doing it and ticket them, then you have to raise the fine. It's the only thing that works. We cannot have a system that we spend a lot of money for enforcement and people are just dodging around. If you get caught, it has to be really serious because you're part of a $20 million cost to the city, and it should be reimbursed. And not only you have to do that, but you have to pay enough in your fines to cover the cost of these PCOs. Otherwise, it's not really reasonable. I had great hopes of this program helping Muni many years ago when it started. They were supposed to concentrate on Muni streets. But I noticed that 24th, which is only two moving lanes, is not even listed where they give citations. And I know that the 5, which I often ride, goes over some very narrow streets, which should be enforced. So we also have to have more yellow zones to take care of the trucks. You may not know it, but these businesses prepay or they just automatically pay their fines. It's a cost of doing business, and it comes to, they pay $1 million a year or a month or whatever, and they don't care because they're just moving. But if they had yellow zones, then they'd have a place to park. Now, I'm sorry if that means that, there's a few less parking places for other people. So this is a
Thank you very much. Eric?
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Eric Tuvel. I'm with the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, and I appreciate Supervisor Wiener's attention to this issue and bringing it up again this year. So over the course of December and January, when MTA and the mayor announced a crackdown on double parking and blocking the box violations, we also conducted a campaign to try to gather information and interim in that time to share with the MTA, which we shared with the MTA and SFPD on that. And we, over the course of 2 months, we received nearly over 500 responses from people via social media and via our online form that people could submit directly where those locations were and what the violations they were seeing. And they identified over 70 unique locations throughout the city. In addition to this stuff, you mentioned a lot about driver education and things like that. I just wanted to let you know about some of the programs we do. We educate all new and renewing taxi drivers at the MTA on a weekly basis on proper loading and unloading, and as well as other safety precautions. Last year, we also educated all 500 Recology truck drivers, as well as some private tech shuttles, including 200 at Google and nearly 75 at Genentech. So we're continuing to look at ways to expand our driver education program to really educate fleet operators who have large vehicles in the city how to drive safely. So as you mentioned, over the last 2 years, nearly 16 miles of bike lanes have been added. And the increase of double parking on major bike routes poses a safety concern for our members and a lot of people in the community. And we'd like to see the city implement more protected bike lanes in these areas to prevent this violation. The MTA should look at increasing loading zones during specific times of day, during non-commute hours, to provide a safe location for loading and unloading to reduce these conflicts. And we'd like to see the MTA look at long-term solutions to alleviate this problem, because I don't believe we can merely enforce our way out of this problem. We have to look at other infrastructure improvements to reduce this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on item number 3? Please come up.
Thank you. I think our cards are still over there on the ledgeway. Thank you. Cynthia Cruz, I just wanted to echo support for this item. I think that enforcement is certainly part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. Protected bikeways that basically block people from being able to park in them. Infrastructure is the way to make some of these changes. Loading zones, increasing those loading zones certainly helps. I would love to see on the 311 app where you can take a picture of someone who's double parked and actually send that in, similarly to the way that you can for people who are parking in driveways. Blocking driveways or blocking pedestrian ways. I think that would be an innovative solution to an app that we already have and that people are already using. I'd also like to see some education on the part of passengers. As a passenger of taxis and ride shares and just getting into other people's cars, I often will say, move out of the way, move down, off to the curb. And so, it would be great if we could educate passengers on where to load safely. And then I just want to give a shout out to 31 Balboa Muni driver yesterday. I believe her number was 3779, was fierce. And she took, in the matter of one route, which took 30 minutes, she took 3 pictures of double parked vehicles in the roadway, and then also in the Muni zone in the stop. And if those drivers can all consistently be able to take photos and enforce that, that would be a great thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers for item number 3?
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon again, Sue Vaughn. And so I hear this is a problem of enforcement, education, and engineering, and it definitely is. And good work to the SFMTA on trying to deal with this. So the population of San Francisco has increased, and so is the number of vehicles is also up. A lot of new construction going on, new units of residential and office space. However, the Transportation Sustainability Program has not gone into action. It's just languishing somewhere, and this is the program that would assess new residential development for transportation impacts. And I think it would be good to investigate that and try to find out where that is. And also, I'm on the MTACAC, and I've suggested a couple of times that the Board of Directors work with the Planning Commission and with the Board of Supervisors to pass legislation to create eco-passes when there are new developments, a way to encourage people to take public transportation, a way to alleviate the need to have a car and to create a parking space for that car, because a lot of this is just about too many vehicles, and we're at the point of saturation. We don't have any place for these vehicles to go. We don't have places for them to park. And that's really a large part of what this problem is. Yes, we need to create more white zones and yellow zones, et cetera. But at some point, there are just going to be too many vehicles. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other members of the public that'd like to comment on item number 3, public comment is closed. Supervisor Wiener, would you like to make a motion on this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm sorry that SFPD is not here. That's unfortunate because SFPD is a key part of the enforcement solution. It should not all be on the MTA. But in any event, I think we got a good flavor today of some of the efforts that are being made, but that we have an enormous amount of work to do. And I look forward to receiving a report in 60 days from MTA on what its plan is to have the capacity to actually enforce double parking more consistently. So with that, I will move to continue item number 3 to the call of the chair.
Okay, this motion is to move to the call of the chair, seconded by Supervisor Kim, and without objection, it is so. Madam Clerk, are there any other items on the agenda?
Madam Chair, there's no further business.
All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.